It's Sunday. I know that it's Sunday, September 20th. This is my Sunday school Bible study for those of you who are just happening in, and Facebook has told you Doug Griffin's going live. It's for Sunday school. You're welcome to stay. It's really good. But if you were looking for a cat video, then I understand you going ahead down to the next post. We've been in Genesis. We are about to start Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel. Babel? Okay. So we're going to take a little bit from the way the writer of Genesis, Moses, constructed this part of it. He kind of gives you a preview first, and he backs up, like he flashes forward, like in some of our movies. Um, just know that the Bible started all that flashbacks and flash forwards and stuff. So he flashes forward in Genesis chapter 10 and says, here's what ultimately happens. And last week we went over the table of nations because Noah had three sons, and Japheth's sons basically went west and north. They went, the ark landed in Mount Ararat, which is in the Caucasus Mountains. And ultimately, Japheth's people went to Europe, and then they went up towards Russia and Siberia and those areas. Ham's children basically went, a lot of them stayed there. They filled out what is present-day Iraq, Iran. They went down to Ethiopia, Nigeria, Egypt. So they went south. And Shem's descendants went, a lot of them stayed in that area, but a lot of them went east to as far as China. The Sinites, or the Sino, S-I-N-O, we call those, they went to China ultimately. So it kind of lays out where everybody went after the Tower of Babel. So it flashes forward. Here's where they all ended up. But for a time period, they were just simply all together in one spot. So we're going to look at those first generations that just stayed together. After the flood, there was 8 people, right? Then there were 24 people because they all had kids. Then there was 68, So first, they're just a small tribe of people. They're all in one place. Ultimately, they spread out. And Genesis chapter 10 chronicles where they went. Now we're flashing back to what caused them all to split up. So we're going to look a little bit at Genesis chapter 10. It's talking about the children of Ham. And Ham had 4 kids, Cush and Mizraim, which became Egypt, and Put and Canaan. Canaan was the grandchild of Noah, who was a Caution, who probably was the first one, probably was the one who actually went in and was spying on his grandfather. Because as soon as Noah woke up, it says that when he saw what was done to him, and I don't know how I think Canaan did something, because Moses had saw what was done to him, and I was like, how did they? I guess maybe he had the blanket on him, but he was mad. So I think something was done to him by Canaan, his grandchild. He immediately says, "Curse is Canaan," because he knew it was Canaan. Because you can recognize, if you're looking, your children and your grandchildren and cousins, and who's kind of crazy and who's very conservative. I mean, you can recognize it. So he knew it was Canaan, and he cursed Canaan, but not Cush, not Mizraim, not the other kids of Ham. In fact, the other kids of Ham went on. They're the ones who established the first great, mighty empires and kingdoms. So they weren't cursed, clearly, because they were the most powerful people. God used those people for years. The Babylonians and the Persians and the Medes, those all came from Ham. Used them for years to dominate that area and to bring judgment on Israel, et cetera, et cetera. But the children of Canaan, they got in trouble a lot. So we're looking at Cush in Genesis chapter 10, verse 8. It says, Cush begat Nimrod. So Cush is one of the kids of Ham, Noah's middle son. And Cush is his grandchild. And Cush begat Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one on the earth. This is Genesis chapter 10, verse 8. And he was like a mighty hunter, it says, before the Lord. Now, before the Lord, that phrase today we would say he did it right in my face. Sometimes it's translated before the Lord. It can be translated against the Lord. It's literally before the Lord, but it's in that same where we would say, you're going to do that in my face. That's not a good thing when we're using that language. You did that right in front of me. That means it was against my will, but it was in front of me. So doing it before the Lord is not the same like Abraham laid before the Lord. He's saying he was a mighty hunter right in God's face. He was, and probably hunting men. So that's that same phrase that's used like Saul hunted David, etc. So he says, that's why it is said, this is in Genesis chapter 10, verse 9, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. But again, not a compliment. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. So the first thing that Nimrod did was establish Babel, then Erech, then Akkad, then Calneh. Now Akkad, Accad, became Akkad. Akkad, which was the Akkadian Empire, was the second great empire that if you studied archaeology or anthropology or history of the Middle East and all of that, the first were the Sumerians, and then the Akkadians was the second great empire. And so he's saying that these were the kingdoms that Nimrod founded. Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Shinar is Sumer. When they split up, and because you all know the story of Babylon, what's about to come, and all their languages were changed, they all left with a different name for where they were. So Shinar, the Assyrians call it Shumer, and in Western civilization we call it Sumer, and they were the Sumerians, and that was the first great empire. So they landed in Sumer, what we would say Sumer, but the Hebrew say it one way, the Aramaic is a different way. All these different languages say that, and so we have to be conscious of the fact that they left Babel, which ultimately became Babylon, with all these different languages. And so they had different names of these cities, but we're able to trace them back and we know what they're talking about. So basically, they all settled in the land of Sumer, which where we get the Sumerians. And from that land, he went to Assyria and he built Nineveh and Rehoboth and Ur and Kala, and it goes on and on. Okay. And these are all famous cities. If that was interesting to you, it was always fascinating to me for some reason, anthropology and history and all that. I just loved stories. So you would recognize these. I just want to point out one thing in verse 25 of Genesis chapter 10. It says, to Eber was born two sons. Now, Eber is where the Hebrews came from. Eber became Hebrew. And he has two sons. One's name was Peleg. And it says, for in his days the earth was divided. So Eber, where the Hebrews came from, and Peleg is like, it's like, it's like, all you intercessors out there, just begin to pray for my wife. So, because she's making me laugh. Peleg was born during the time of this great division, and he's like Abraham's great-great-grandfather. I'm assuming that they're pointing him out because only two names that are specifically where they stop and actually have a whole sentence about them, Nimrod and Peleg. And so, and it says he was born, his name actually means division. So he and Nimrod are contemporaries. So Abraham's great-grandfather either caused division or tried to stop the division. His name means division. It says because he was born during the time of division, and so that's when they began to call him. And so either he was for it or he was against it. And I tend to think just from the history of Abraham's family that probably he was against it. You know, because in that time God was looking for families that were following and hearing his voice and listening to what he had just told Noah. God had just judged the earth. That's what's so fantastic about this. He just judged the earth. And 2 generations later, they're already being rebellious. Like some people just don't learn lessons. But one family said, no, didn't God just judge us for not listening to him? So I think that's what Peleg represents, because that's Abraham's family. And, you know, anyway. So, now we're in Genesis chapter 11. That was a lot of introduction just to get to Genesis chapter 11, verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. Of course they did. They all came from Noah, his three sons. At that point, there weren't that many of them. So the whole earth also can be translated just land. So the land where they were living, because they hadn't spread out to the whole earth. So the land where they were living in only had one language, only had one speech. Verse 2, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, a better translation would have been to the east. So they're in the Caucasus Mountains, they're in the highlands, they came down the highlands. If you're looking at a map, which I know you aren't, they came down to the Mesopotamian Valley, and they're in the plains now, and they go to Sumer, which translate as Sumer, which means land of two rivers. And so the two rivers that are meeting together are the Tigris and the Euphrates. So they were in the highlands, and they came down to the plains, and then they found a plain in the land of Shinar. So they're going east. So they're really going to the east from the west, and they dwelt there. And it's significant that they're finding this place to live. Now they're going to have to really work together. These two rivers, this fertile valley is not like the Nile. The great thing about the Nile is that it did the same thing every year. There's a certain time it was going to come and flood all their crops, not in a bad way, flood in a good way, and they were going to irrigate and they could count on it. They knew exactly when to plant crops. That's why Egypt lasted for so long as a great civilization. They know when they were going to sow, when they're going to reap. They knew the whole thing because you could count on the Nile. It was not so in the Mesopotamian area. It was very it was very unpredictable when the rains were going to come and the floods were going to come. So they had to come up with an irrigation system. So if you're going to stay in that place, you're going to have to get everybody to work together and construct a system for irrigation. And then that's what the Sumerians did. They gave us irrigation. They gave us sewage system. Because some people didn't want to go down to the river and poop all the time. They said, let's go ahead and make the river come to our houses. Like they even had bathrooms in their houses. So they were so advanced. Some people did, the rich did. And then when we pooped, then it'll go to the river and then be washed away. And they had carts with wheels and a stick with a nail in it. No, they had carts with wheels and writing. The Sumerians gave us writing. So this was like an advanced civilization. They gave us writing, the Sumerians did. But they were just the grandkids of Noah, who were all settled, and they decided we need to stick together. Okay, well, so Genesis chapter 11, verse 3. Then they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. So when it says they had bricks for stone, other civilizations used actual stone. It was easier to stay up in the mountains and break off stones and build things than to make your own stones. Like, how are we going to make our own stones? We should have stayed over there where their stones were, because we're trying to build houses that are going to last, right? And so they said, oh, they invented bricks because there was clay in the sand, and it can harden and able to bake in the sun. And they invented bricks. So we don't need those stones. We don't need to carve them out of the mountains. We'll make bricks for stone. It says, and they had asphalt for mortar. Also in the sand had this slime in it. It was this thick tar stuff that we now know is oil, was in the ground. And wherever they walked, like, why is this sand had this black stuff in it? Oh, you know what? It's like sticky and slimy. And if we stick it together with the bricks, so we can build houses now. So they figured this out, how to build, and they built the ziggurat, Ziggurat. You've seen pictures of these. They're not like pyramids, which are kind of triangle shaped and go up. These are rectangle shaped and kind of go up like steps. And those were the first great temples. So, and they said in verse 4, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower. Now, they knew what they were doing. They are going right with their great granddaddy, Cain. Because in Genesis chapter 4, verse 16 through 17, after God pronounced the curse that was on Cain, meaning God is identifying, here's your problem. He's not cursing you so that you have no choice, because that would not be fair if God were to curse you and now you're just going to go out and do bad things. He's telling you, this is your curse. This is your problem. You're going to be this way and that, And so once he told him, this is your curse, this is what your problem is, Cain, instead of repenting and saying, Lord, help me, I don't want to be that way, he did the opposite. In verse 16 of Genesis chapter 4 says, then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. So he just got mad at God. And that's always our choice. You see, the Bible and the world is divided into, when God tells you what's wrong with you, you either get mad and rebel, or you repent and conform. The world is divided into two sets of people, period. So Cain got mad. And he left the presence of the Lord. Of course, you can't leave the presence of the Lord, but in his mind, I'll just get away from God then. And that's what we do when people go off and sin or stay in sin. They think, well, God can't see me now, so I'll just, I'll act up. So he went from the presence of the Lord. And in verse 17 of Genesis chapter 4, it says, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. That's not the other Enoch, that's Cain's Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. So that was his rebellion. I'm going to build a city, and I'll form my own government, make my own laws and my own rules, and I'll have nothing to do with God. I don't want to listen to God's rules. God said I had to bring a sheep and sacrifice it, and I'm going to do what I want. And that was the beginning of a city. So after the flood, and they leave the highlands and they come down the Caucasus Mountains and they go to Mesopotamian Valley and they go to the land of two rivers with the Sumer. They said, hey, you know what made all the sense in the world? What Cain said. Cain said, I'm going to build a city. Let's build a city. That just makes so much sense. And so they are forming their own government. We want to govern ourselves. We know that God just judged 3 generations ago, but we're going to do our own thing. Okay, so and interesting enough, Psalm 127, verse 1 says, unless the Lord build the house, they labor in vain who builds it. So if God's not behind what you're doing, you can, okay, go ahead and build your city, but it's not going to come to any good. It says, unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. Like, if God's not guarding you and helping you in whatever it is that you're building, whatever it is that we're building, if God's not behind it, he'll let you build it, but it's going to fall apart. Okay, so they made 3 mistakes. We're going to build a city whose top is in the heavens, and we're going to make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the earth. So these are the 3 problems with the city. They wanted its top to reach to the heavens, so that they can talk to the gods. Now, from Sumeria, we have the beginning of the concept of gods. So there was Cain saying, man is going to do its own thing, and man will be our own gods. But they actually created the concept of gods when you look of actual gods, not man being God, but the Sumerian gods. Once the people all broke up and went to Greece and to Rome and to India and to China and all these places, they took with them the concept of gods. Nimrod was the first God, after the person who presented himself as a god. When you just read archaeology history, anthropological history, after his death, okay, so he was presenting himself as the seed of woman. Now, don't forget, they all knew the prophecy that was given to Eve, and the seed of woman is going to step on the serpent's head, and he shall bruise his heel. So they're waiting for the seed of woman to show up. Who's going to be this Messiah, this Lord, who's going to come and be the deliverer? So he presented himself as the seed of woman. Do you know the name? What is it? Zoroaster, which later became Zoroastra, means seed of woman. And that's who Nimrod was later called, Zoroaster, and that's where the whole Zoroastrian religion. I'm the seed of woman. I'm the promised deliverer. And I am the Lord, the Adon. Adonai means, Adonai is the plural for Adon. Adon means Lord. And when the Jews say Adonai, they're giving the plural form of the Lord. But Adon, Adon, Adonis, is also comes from that. And that's who Nimrod began to call himself when we study Sumerian history. And so, and this whole idea of the man who is going to bruise the serpent's head, and then but the serpent's going to bruise his heel, was passed to all these different cultures. This is who Nimrod presented himself as. You know that um, that the Greek gods presented themselves, that Hercules is in his crib grabbing the serpent. That's not something that the Greeks made up. That was passed down to him, that's what the god is supposed to do. Achilles, the reason Achilles was vulnerable in the heel is because of the legend, because Achilles is the son of a goddess, right? And that's who Nimrod presented himself as. I'm the son of a goddess, and his only vulnerability was in his heel. So, and it's not a coincidence that his vulnerability was in his heel. Achilles was presenting himself as that god because it says that the serpent would bruise his heel. That's why Achilles, his only vulnerability was in his heel, because the Greeks, the Romans, I can just go on. Krishna is pictured as having a snake that he's crushing, that under his feet, and that he later was killed by an arrow in his heel. All these cultures, whether it's India or Egypt, they all have gods that are all patterned after Nimrod, who presented himself as this god man. So when they say we're going to go to the heavens, we're going to create a pantheon of gods. We are going to make ourselves gods, not be our own government like Cain was saying, where man is exalted, but we're the promise, and Nimrod saying, I'm the promised God. So that's why you all have to listen to me, do whatever I say, because I'm this person. So he says, let us make a name for ourselves. I'm sorry. First, I'm going to say the first one, we're going to make a tower whose top is in the heavens. In Revelation chapter 17, it says, when there's a vision of this woman, it says, on her forehead a name was written. Revelation chapter 17, verse 5, which says, Mystery Babylon the Great. Now, again, this area, the Sumerian people ultimately became Babylon, this area where they settled. And it says, this Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Why is Babylon the mother of harlots? Babylon, because all of these, the idea of prostitution or being a harlot in biblical language is we're married to God, but we cheat on God by worshiping all these other things. We just love to worship this and worship that. We're like harlots. And the whole idea about worshiping other gods originated in Babylon. Babylon is the mother of that. And so the philosophy that Nimrod was creating by building this tower was carried to all these. Once they split up, all these idea of gods and the pantheon of gods and the serpent and the snake and the heel and was carried to all these nations. And so the idea of worshiping idols originated here with this one statement: let's build a tower whose top is in the heavens. In Genesis chapter 11, verse 4, the next thing he says, and we're going to make a name for ourselves, because there's three things. We're going to build into heavens, we're going to make a name for ourselves. Okay, so we're going to be famous, and people will worship us throughout generations. We're going to make a name, because immortality is something that people were looking for. And that's why we put our names on buildings and have things named after us. It's just an instinct to live forever. And since we now know we're going to die, we think we can leave our names on things. And I don't mean to say that that's an evil thing. That's just we have a desire that God put in us to live forever. Well, we are going to live forever. That's the problem. We're going to live forever in his presence or live forever in hell. So we are going to. That's a correct instinct. But we have the way to live forever. There is everlasting life, when we're connected to God. But we think, I know how to live forever. I'll put my name on some huge thing, and that will, I'm going to make a name for myself that will last. And that's what they were doing. People will never forget us. Well, yeah, turns out they were right. But instead of being famous, they were infamous. In Exodus chapter 9, verse 16, in Exodus chapter 9, Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, and he's speaking for God, he says, but indeed for this purpose I've raised you up, that I may show my power in you and that my name may be declared in all the earth. So Pharaoh, I raised you up just so you'd be really famous. So God doesn't mind allowing certain people to get all the attention and all the fame, because when they fall, then their fall becomes fame and God gets glory. People go, ooh, I don't want to do what that person did. So like we're upset. Oh no, look, that person's evil. That person's terrible. And look how famous they are. And then God's like, that's okay. I for this purpose, Pharaoh, I've raised you up so that when you fall, people will be enamored with me. Yeah, so you're gonna make a name for yourself, but that name is, ooh, I don't want to do that. And so in Isaiah chapter 63, verse 12, he says he led the children of Israel by the right hand of Moses, and with his glorious arm, dividing the water before them to make for himself an everlasting name. So God always gets the glory. God never loses. That's the good deal. We get stressed out. We're like, oh no, things are going badly. And God's like, no, it's not. It's going exactly according to plan. God doesn't stress. God's like, relax. I've got this. You think the wicked are winning, and they are not. They are just allowing them to rise up. So when I knock them down, everybody will go, ooh, I better get on my knees and start praying to God again. Look, that, oh, how the mighty have fallen. Now, in fact, when they did cross over back into the promised land, which was the land of Canaan, remember, Canaan has a curse on him. God's pronounced, Canaan, you're just going to come to no good, you and your descendants. And so ultimately, God gives Canaan's land away. And all those Canaanites and Hivites and Amorites and all those were eventually wiped off the face of the earth because they just refused to honor God. And the children of Israel occupied that land. Well, when they came in, the first place they went to was the place where they walked around 7 times, and the walls fell. Jericho. I had to sing the song, Joshua fought the battle of Jericho when the walls came tumbling down. So when they go to Jericho and they sent spies into the city, they come to Rahab, and Rahab said, "Oh, we've heard all about you. Your fame is already. We know what you did to Pharaoh. Your God is already famous, and we're actually afraid of you." And so uh, we as Christians don't need to be. We as people who love God, who love the Lord, don't. We just need to live in less panic, right? The wicked are actually afraid of us if we're got our hands in God's hands. So we need to just sit back and let God do what he do and not fret the way that we do. We just fret way too much. For somebody who has God on our side, I'm thinking of a basketball team having this great center like Shaquille O'Neal or something, and the other players are like, huh, we're not worried, and we're playing with confidence because we know who we got on our side. So so we have to act more like we win in the end, because we do. So we're going to make a name for ourselves. We're going to build a tower up into heavens, lest we be scattered now abroad over the face of the whole earth. So our whole plan is we're going to stay together. Now, if you're going to build a mighty city like they were planning on building, then you really have to stick together. I mean, we have to. Nimrod said we have to come and devise some sort of project that everybody can work on that'll keep us all as one. And that whole idea of uniting people and making them one, a lot of dictators in the past have had that sort of feel. We got to have a common enemy or common project, so I keep the people together, because he did not want them to spread. Ironically, when they got off the boat, off the ark, in Genesis chapter 9, verse 1, it says, so God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. But Nimrod saying, no, let's all stay in one place, because if we all stay together and work together, look what mighty things we can accomplish. And again, I know you're not supposed to bring up like the Nazis, so I'm not bringing up the Nazis. But let's say there was a people like that, who the whole idea is let's keep this all together, because who knows what we can accomplish if we stay together. After they were defeated, that's one reason why they built the Berlin Wall. Like, we got to keep these people separate. The whole idea of because once people have the wrong idea in their heads and they're working toward the wrong goal, they're going to accomplish it and they're going to do a lot of harm. So it's a good idea to keep them spread out. But he's saying, no, let's all stay together, lest we be scattered. Uh, you know, so so he has three things he wants to accomplish. We're going to build this tower, so we build it to heavens. We're going to make a name for ourselves, which they did, and we are going to keep the people from being scattered. So I want everybody just to live in Sumer for the rest of their lives, because just think what we can accomplish. So here's the consequences of disobedience. Um, this same pattern was repeated because God said, fill the earth, and Nimrod said, no, let's all stay together. In Mark chapter 16, verse 14 through 15, after Jesus had been resurrected and had appeared to different people separately, and it says in verse 14 in Mark chapter 16, later he appeared to the 11 as they sat at the table. And he rebuked their unbelief and hardness of heart. Because the 11, even though they had been with Jesus all this time and he kept telling them what was going to happen, in their heads, they had a whole different scenario of what God was going to do. And we do that. We have a different scenario of how we think God is going to solve something. And so we don't recognize what he's doing. Fortunately, that doesn't stop him from doing what he's going to do. God's still going to do what he do. But sometimes we don't recognize it. And so we can be stressed out and frustrated and angry, and we don't recognize God is moving. He's not moving at the pace we want to move at. He's not doing it the way we want to do it, but he's still moving. God doesn't forget. God doesn't go, oh yeah, I forgot you guys are going through that. Let me show up and so
He's
so
better than
he's
that.
better than that. So they're all depressed and they hold themselves up in their room. Oh man, we are so defeated. So Jesus shows up in his resurrected body and he rebukes them for their unbelief. Like, what is wrong with you? Okay. Then and because it says they did not believe those who had seen him after he had risen. Because people came and told the disciples, hey, I saw Jesus over here. Yeah, sure. I saw Jesus. If Jesus was real, he would appear to us. Oh, really? Okay. Well, I'm about to appear to you, and you're not going to be happy when I do. So, and he said to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And they said, nah, not gonna, not gonna do that. So, and so Jesus left, and they just stayed in Jerusalem. He said, go into all the world, and they just didn't. In Acts chapter 1, a second time, in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, he says, you'll receive power after the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you are going to be witnesses. So this time he's not asking him, he's telling him what's going to happen. So this is a blessing, just like a curse, where God is describing, I can see what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen. Just like with the curse, I can see what bad things are going to happen to you. And he says, and you shall be witnesses to me in Jerusalem, and then all Judea, and then Samaria, and then the ends of the earth. So he's telling them exactly the pattern that's going to happen, and they still didn't move. They just came together and kept worshiping together, kind of like the church today. I'm going to get on that in a second. Acts chapter 8, verse 1 and 2. It says, now Saul was consenting to his death, the death of Stephen. Because again, they're just in Jerusalem. So Saul's in Jerusalem, and they are killing the apostles one by one who are still in Jerusalem. It says, and at that time, a great persecution arose against the church, which was at Jerusalem, even though they weren't supposed to be there, and they were all scattered. Why is this happening? Because God told you to get out, and you didn't. I don't understand why. Why is this fire burning me? Because I told you to move over, because if I don't get it. Okay, so, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles, it says. So the church, who the apostle had been witnessing to people in the church, they began to scatter, and they went through Judea, and they went to Samaria. The apostles are still staying in Jerusalem. In Acts chapter 8, verse 3 and 4, it says, as for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering every house, dragging off men and women, committing them to prison. Therefore, those who were scattered went everywhere preaching the word. So they were forced to, now they could have stayed there and just gotten killed. So, because God's like, I'm not going to make you do anything. But God knows what sort of situation to send to make us go, I need to get out of here. And so they went on their own. God doesn't make you do anything, but he knows how to inspire you to go ahead and do what he wants you to do. So, and then it says in Acts chapter 11, verse 19, now those who were scattered after the persecution that arose over Stephen traveled as far as Phoenicia, Cyprus, Antioch preaching the word to no one but the Jews only. They were still only preaching to the Jews. Now, here's another ironic thing. Saul is the one, he's the instrument for getting them to start going out and doing what Jesus told them to do, but they're only preaching to the Jews. Then God saves Saul. He turns into Paul, and he's the one that goes out and starts preaching to the Gentiles. And God had told him to preach to everybody, but we just want to stay in our own places. And God is just as frustrated with the church today when we just simply come together in our temples, and now we're mad that we can't meet in our temples. We are forced to be out in the world. We're supposed to be in our temples, and how dare they stop us from, and we don't, instead of looking at this and going, I wonder if this is God. Because again, they didn't think, I wonder if this is God. When the disciples, when the persecution came to them, they just gripped down even tighter in Jerusalem. And instead of thinking, something's making us go out and not stay in our temple, no, they didn't think, I bet this is God. And we don't think that. We're just too busy mad at but so instead of going, well, since we can't meet at the church, maybe we should meet in the park. Maybe we should go over here. Maybe I should just go to my neighbor. Instead of saying, what other things can we do? We're just mad. And that's and so, our purpose is not to come together as a church and meet and hear the word on Sundays, and then that's it. We're supposed to go out into the world. If we're not sharing, it's not for us. That's why he gave the parable of the vine dresser in Matthew, and I'm doing Matthew on Wednesday nights, because he put vine dressers over his vineyard, right? But they were supposed to just cultivate the grapes and then pass out the wine. But when he sent people to get the wine, they said, no, we're not giving you this wine. This is our wine. And it's like, what are you talking about? I just put you over give me that wine so I can pass it out to people. People are supposed to be drinking this wine. And they said like, no. And so Jesus said, well, I'm going to have to remove you and put people in your place who will do what I ask them to do. And God will remove us if we're not doing what he's asking us to do, which is to preach the gospel throughout the world. Not be satisfied and simply come together, hear the gospel, and then go home. And it's like, no, take it out. In whatever way, be the gospel. He says you'll be witnesses. So we don't have to, it doesn't mean that you have to stand on the street corners with a megaphone. And I think a lot of people who do that, but that's not everybody's ministry. But he says you'll be a witness. Be a witness. Take God to people and be a witness everywhere you go. In the supermarket, you can spend time calling the police on people, and I get that. Or you can spread Jesus's love. That would be so much more interesting if the church was famous for being Jesus in different places and spreading God's love. I would love to hear stories about healings taking place and deliverances taking place and lives being changed, instead of stories of Christians being the police or something. The police should be the police, but the church should be the church. So they had a plan. Nimrod, we're all going to stay together. You're not going to move us. Oh, no. We're going to stay, even though God had told them to spread out and fill the earth. So, yes, that's when you call. Yeah. So that's like a Bugs Bunny. That's Elmer Fudd sort of thing.
Old saying,
right.
When you're hard-headed.
Right. I know. But it's also, someone reminded me that Elmer Fudd Bugs Bunny used to say that about Elmer Fudd.
Yes.
Such a Nimrod. So, but that means hard-headed. And that's what we are if we're not listening to do what God told us to do. So, back to Genesis chapter 11, verse 5. It says, but the Lord came down. Now, obviously, God saw everything that was going on, but that was an anthropomorphization of what God did. They're trying to explain in human terms, like I try to do, what God did. Obviously, God knew what was going on, but they're trying to give that example. Like your parents let you have your friends over, and you can go in your room, but just don't be too loud. And sure enough, you go in your room, and then you just forget everything your parents said. That's what we do. We just forget everything God said. And so you're loud, and you're playing, and you're jumping on the bed, and you're okay, be quiet in there, and you're loud, and the parents hear the whole thing, and they, but they're giving you room to repent and to stop. Okay, and so finally they have to come into the room. Don't make me come in there. And God is saying that all the time. Don't make me come down. He's already down. I mean, like the parents already know. In our minds, when the door opened, and that's when they found out. But the parents, they know what you're doing. They can hear you. You're loud. You're jumping on the bed. You're screaming. They hear you bouncing the balls off the wall, and
Hey,
they hear all that stuff.
that's personal.
So, whew, she needs prayer. So they they hear everything. They know what's going on. So when they open the door is not when they found out. That's in our minds as kids. That's when your parents found out what you were doing. Oh no, now our parents know. They knew the whole time, but they were giving you room to stop. That's what "don't make me come in there" means. Don't make me come in there. Okay, now I'm coming. So it says, and then the Lord came down. It's like, okay, I told you not to make me come down there. But he already knew what he was going to do, because once he comes down, that's it. Now your friend's going to have to go home. You know, I remember if you live in parts of the country that have basements, then you'd have a party in the basement, and the parents would finally have to come down the stairs and say, okay, the party's over, or you have to kick everybody out of the pool. That's come down means that's now when he's going to move. But he's aware all the time of what we're doing. There's the time when God comes down. Like in Genesis chapter 18, verse 20 through 21, it says, and the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, so he's given them room to repent, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come up to me. And if not, I will know. But he already knows, like your parents already know. But they're just giving, they're putting, I wouldn't say they're putting words in God's mouth. They're trying to give us a human understanding of there's a time period when God finally shows up, and that means he's now going to do something. But all that time that he didn't, and that he delayed, doesn't mean he didn't know what was going on. And that's what we think. Well, God must not know. He knows. But when it says now he came down, that means now the action is going to happen. The consequences are now going to happen. So in Genesis chapter 11, verse 5, he came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. But again, he'd already seen it all. He already knows it. This is just Moses explaining to us, like the parents finally opened the door to see what you were doing. But they know what you were doing because they know what they put in your room. And they know what's there, and they get, okay. In fact, in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 21, it says, have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth. So even back then, they knew that the earth was round, okay? And its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. It's he who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. He brings the princes to nothing. He makes the judges of the earth useless. So have you not known? God sees everything. God said it. He's the one that stretched out the heavens, and the stars, not ironically, but are moving. Is that God set the stars in motion? He did all of that. We're like grasshoppers to him. And I don't like grasshoppers; they can jump on you. But in those days, like grasshoppers were nothing. You can just squash them. And they said that's how God is, and he brings the princes of the earth to nothing. Princes of the earth think they are getting away with stuff. You're not getting away with anything. God sees it all. So Genesis chapter 11, verse 6 through 7. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they began to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. So here's the problem. They're doing wrong, is what God is saying. They got the wrong concept in their mind. My wife always says, confused on the concept. They got the wrong idea in their head, and now they're going to just damage themselves and damn it. And so I've got to go down and break it up, not because God's afraid of, oh no, they've got too much power. It's not, there's no contest between us and God. It's just that now they've got the wrong thing in their mind. Now, I've never told this story, but one day I found a little box of what I thought were chocolates in my mom's drawer. And in my mind, oh, look, she set these out for me. Because mom brings food out and it's for you. And mom doesn't have her own food. Everything that mom has is for you. So if it's sitting there, that must be for me. And it was a box of chocolates. Now, it was not a box of chocolates. I'm going to take this to school and pass this out to my friends. So I already have the wrong concept, right? I need to be stopped because everybody's going to go, ooh, this is fantastic. And these are, thank you so much. And they're all the people are going to be as one and in my third grade class. And there's going to be a problem by the end of the day. Hallelujah. So I need to be stopped before because that was in my mind to do. Oh, this will be wonderful. I'll be so popular at school. They will just, oh, who is the person that brought these? Let him come forth, for he's made a name for himself.
Nimrod right
He
there.
was such a Nimrod. So fortunately, I was stopped because I said, well, let me taste one of these first. And so God is saying, we have to stop these people because what they have in mind to do is not that God is jealous. They are on the wrong road. And if they stay together and do they're going to kill themselves because they're creating a pantheon of gods and they're just, if I'm not their God, their lives are going to be horrible, and their children's children and the generations, this is going to be the worst thing ever. So we must stop it because they are on the wrong path, right? So here's what he says is the easy thing to do. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. And if they cannot understand one another, so that they can understand one another, we think that God, some people act like God did a miracle and they just changed their vocal cords, and suddenly they were trying to say yes, but they said we, and it just came out differently in their mouth. But he confused their language so they couldn't understand one another. So and here's what's interesting, even though they all have the same idea, they couldn't understand each other. And when we can't understand, when you're saying something differently than me, even though I'm saying hand me the hammer and you're saying hand me the hammer, but you're saying it in a way I don't understand, even though we have the same thing, because I can't understand you, because you're saying it differently, I now think you're the enemy. That's what we do. Like, because even today, just in our political sphere, a lot of times we have the same goal. We're trying to help the poor. One says, I think we'd help the poor if we force them to work more, and some says, I think we help the poor if we can give them the resources they need. And the whole idea is both sides want to help the poor. But because you're saying it differently than me, I hate you. You're my enemy. There are people who have ideas about the rich. Well, I think the rich should give their resources. No, we should give the rich the tools to use their money to do. No, we should take their money from them and distribute. No, but it's still, the goal is they've got so much. How can we have that trickle down to the people? We can take it, or we can do this, and then hopefully they'll use it. But it's the same goal. It's the same goal. How can we get that wealth distributed? So in a way, should they distribute it themselves, or should we just force them to? But it's the same goal. But you're saying it differently than me, so I hate you. I hate you. I hate you. You. We see the same problems, and we all have and God knew that while they're building this tower, if I change their language so they don't understand one another, even though their goal, he didn't stop them from building the tower, they'll stop themselves. They won't work together because if you're saying it differently than me, I'm not going to work with you. And so they'll just stop, and they stopped. He changed their language so they couldn't understand each other, it says. And so I don't understand what you're saying. But it's like I was saying what I was saying 5 minutes ago, but I don't understand it, so I hate you because you're saying it. You're not saying it the way I want it to be said. I don't know what you're saying. And so they had the same thing that they were trying to do, but they were hearing it differently. Now, here's how he reversed that on the day of Pentecost. In Acts chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost. And this is all on purpose, right? I love how it's written. In Acts chapter 2, verse 5, it says, and there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. So don't forget, once they split up, they went and scattered themselves through the whole earth. Well, God waited for a day when they were all going to be back. And so they were from every nation under heaven. It says, and when the sound occurred, then the multitude came together and were confused because everyone heard them speak in his own language. So here's the opposite happening. I'm now understanding what you're saying I'm hearing them speak in my own language. Doesn't even say they spoke in their own. They're hearing in their own language. Them that were all amazed and marveled, saying to one another. Then they were all amazed and they marveled, saying to one another, "Look, are not all these who speak Galileans? And how is it that we hear each in our own language in which we were born? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, those who are in Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt. This is where the children of Ham went, and the parts of Libya, according to Cyrene, visitors from Rome. These are where the children of Japheth went, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. These are the children of Shem went. We hear them speak in our own tongues the wonderful works of God. So they are all finally hearing the same thing, right? God split them up. No, they split themselves up. They went all the corners, and they finally came back together. God doesn't mind us working together if what we're hearing about is the works of God. But if we're hearing the works of man, then we're going to be confused. So anytime man is in charge of the project, man has the wrong concept. We're doing the wrong thing. Ooh, let me take these chocolates to school. We are doing the wrong thing, and God's going to confuse our understanding of one another. But if we're doing the works of God, because that's what they were saying, talking about the works of God, then they all heard the same thing, even though they had split up. They were from every nation under the sun, and so on purpose, these two things are opposite each other. They all came together. So if we're coming together and we're talking about the works of God, it doesn't matter what language, we're all going to hear and we're going to understand each other. And I remember I had traveled with a singing group all over Japan, and we went to Hawaii at the very end of our trip. And we went into this Hawaiian church. Some of us just went to visit this Hawaiian church. And this choir was rehearsing. And they're singing in their Hawaiian tongue, which we did not know, but they're singing the works of God. They were singing about God. And it was so beautiful that we all just started to weep. It was so beautiful. We just started to cry because it didn't matter. We knew they were singing about God, and we understood what they were saying, and we felt one with them, and we understood them, and we were hugging them afterwards. And in fact, when we sang in Russia, when we sang all over the world, people would come up after us, and basically they were saying, the interpreters would tell us, we don't know. We knew what you were saying, that you were singing about our God, and they would weep and hug us, and we were one because we were one in God. And so when we unite as Christians all over the world, and we're doing the works of God instead of the works of man, then we're all together. We're all united, and there's a oneness. So he split them up because they were doing the works of man. And in Genesis chapter 11, verse 8, I'm almost done. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they ceased building the city. And again, when it says the Lord scattered them, it's not like a wind came and blew. Because of what he had done, if I can't understand you, I'm not going to work with you. And that's how we are. And so, but Paul said in Acts chapter 17, and I read this last week, verse 26 and 27, and he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the earth, on the face of the earth. We're all just from one blood. We're all one people. He says he made from one blood. We're not really Asians and this and that, and we're all from one blood. We're living in different countries, so we can say, yes, I'm from Asia, I'm from here, I'm from there, but we're all just humans. And he says, and he has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. He knew where he was going to send them all, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each of us. The whole purpose of splitting them up is, if they are separate, they'll feel more alone and want to reach out for God. But when they were all together doing the works of man, then they felt this confidence in being together with one another, and I don't need God. I've got this, that's why these mega churches will put into small groups and small Bible studies, because there's a confidence that can come from, I go to church that has 10,000 people, and you're more confident in the church than you are in God. So he says, no, I need to put you in the separate, small little cell groups, so that in your each way you will look for God, that you won't have confidence in man, that you'll have confidence in God. So in Genesis chapter 11, verse 9, it says, therefore, this name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the languages of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad from over the face of the earth. So his will was done. He told Noah, spread out across the earth, but it took Babel to get it done. Let's not wait till God forces us to split up. Let's not wait till God forces us to be torn apart. Let's do His work and do His will without needing the persecution, without needing the pandemic or whatever. Let's be about our Father's business, united as one. So thank you so much for tuning in. We will continue now with Abraham next week. And if you want, some of you can tune in on on Wednesdays at 7 o'clock for my Bible study. We're going through the book of Matthew. And if you're a member of Good Shepherd, please stay tuned and go to the Good Shepherd page or Reverend Grimm's page because his sermon's about to start any minute. Thank you so much.